I talk about partnerships a lot, and I want to thank the different commissioners and everyone else for their partnership on this budget. And I want to thank the members of the Common Council, Council President Bowman, Majority Leader Halton Pope, who I've met with several times over the course of the past few weeks to discuss the budget, and the other council members who I've met with in the past few days to discuss the budget. And I look forward to working with them over the course of the next few weeks to finalize this plan, and so we can set Buffalo on a financial trajectory that we all want to see it on. So upon becoming mayor, I inherited a $17 million mid-year shortfall for financial year 24-25, and what turned out to be more than a $70 million structural deficit for spending year 25-26, an amount which was much higher than original estimates. In order to address those issues, it took immediate action. So I immediately instituted a soft hiring freeze, some departmental cuts, and paused non-essential spending. As a result, we turned that mid-year shortfall into what is now projected to be a $1 million surplus in the current year. Additionally, we're changing the way we budget here at City Hall. In order to curtail shortfalls in future budget years, we are making changes to past budgeting methods and revenue projection processes. So I'm here today to present the 25-26 budget, which will be a $622 million spending plan, which is less than a 1% increase year over year. And I can tell you that considering the ever-increasing cost of doing business and operating government, it took a tremendous effort on all involved to keep this budget basically neutral from last year. When I talk about that ever-increasing cost, I'm talking about the controls and expenses that the city of Buffalo cannot control on our own, whether that be operational costs over the course of the last few years, increase in contractual obligations such as union contract salaries, health care, pension costs, utility and supply costs, which are up due to inflation and global markets, to the tune of overall in the budget between $10 and $20 million, nearly $20 million in increases. So how do you address that? You start looking inside operationally and what you can do to fix those expenditures. So looking through our different departments, we are realizing $10 million in straight departmental cuts across the board, an additional $16.5 million in vacancy savings throughout the different departments. If you couple those two things with several other smaller cost cutting and saving measures, we ended up in the range of around $30 million in direct cuts or savings throughout the different departments. But you can't close a $70+ million hole just through cutting. You need to bring additional revenues in the door. And given the factors that I addressed, I am proposing an 8% property tax levy increase, which is necessary to stabilize city finances after years of flat tax revenue. This increase will generate around $13.7 million for the upcoming year alone. I know when people hear 8%, they become uneasy with it, but just for practical application, on a home that's assessed at $150,000 for next year, that will be an $11 a month increase. In addition to that, we still had a hole we had to address, so we had to get creative. And in order to do that, we requested 2 new pieces of legislation and authorization for those pieces of legislation from New York State. We've identified practical ways to generate new recurring revenues for next year, and we'll continue to hold negligent property owners accountable, which will lead to additional revenue for the city of Buffalo. But when we're talking about those 2 pieces of legislation, the first is the Buffalo Parking and Mobility Authority, which would bring an infusion of cash to the city of Buffalo somewhere between $40 and $60 million. The proceeds of the sale of the 4 city-owned parking ramps will do so. In addition to that, and I think this is an absolute key component, is the fact that we will also receive a recurring revenue on a yearly basis from that structure and that agreement that we ultimately end up with. And we will ultimately also end up with some oversight when it comes to parking rates. We also ask for the establishment of a hotel occupancy tax at 3%, which will generate $3.5 million for the city of Buffalo. These pieces of legislation are going to help us avoid a monumental, monstrous tax increase or layoffs, cuts throughout the departments that we don't want to experience. It could be a rather devastating tax increase to people, a devastating cuts in layoffs, or a combination of the two if we don't have those pieces of legislation. I want to take a moment to thank Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes for her continued assistance on this effort to get these two pieces of legislation passed in the state budget. And while we, as a city, obviously face financial challenges, together we'll turn them into opportunities to build a better Buffalo. My proposed budget sets Buffalo on a path to self-sufficiency, improved services, and a stronger financial future. With that being said, I can open it, any questions for myself or Commissioner Nosworth.
Mayor, what will you do if this bed tax in the parking authority is not approved through the state legislature? And is this budget really relying on the unknown at this point?
Well, I think if you look at any budget, it's relying on the unknown, right? People talk about if-comes all the time, but any budget is an if-come. Your personal, municipal income or municipal budget is always if-comes. They all are. But, I feel very confident about the fact that we'll receive these two pieces of legislation. Again, the Assembly Majority Leader has been extremely supportive. We've had very productive conversations with the governor's office. Hopefully we'll receive support from our members in the Senate, the state Senate. And I think we'll find out soon that those will be in there. I feel very confident about it. If not, we will reevaluate and adjust from there.
There's been some criticism about the parking garages and selling that as a kind of a one-trick, one-time revenue-generating measure. Does selling the garages really just temporarily fix the budget hole for this year, or can you explain why it's not a one-trick?
No, it's not. I've heard people call it a one-trick gimmick and things like that. It's not. It's a direct infusion of cash, somewhere between the amount of $40 and $60 million that'll come into the city of Buffalo that we will use over the course of several years to help adjust our structural deficit. If you take a look at the 4-year plan that we are presenting, it lays out how we are using it. It's not all being used in 1 year, despite what some people like to say. It is being spent over the course of several years while we address the structural deficit within this budget. And I think, again, in addition to that influx of cash, one of the key components is the fact that we will retain a recurring revenue on a yearly basis while offloading the maintenance and capital requirements that we would take on, and also have some oversight over rates. So, I've said while talking to people that this is a win-win situation, the establishment of this authority. At the end of the day, it's really a win-win-win-win for the city of Buffalo.
Mayor, what more specifically is the plan for overtime? Because I remember last year during the budget workshops, police and fire overtime was a big problem.
Yeah, if you look at when you get a look at this year's budget, and you can take a look at the current year, we've actually done some things already where the police department is trending down last year to this year. We're going to the new commissioner has some other ideas on how to curtail some of that spending. We're having conversations with the fire commissioner as well about changing some of the ways some people are allowed to work on specific shifts that could hopefully curtail some spending. One of the key components is, when we look at the overtime number, you have to look at the number of hours worked, right? We want to make sure that those hours are dropping. We have contractual obligations when it comes to paying people a certain amount of money to work. We are working on reducing the number of hours worked. So sometimes that overall number can be misleading because people are receiving raises every year, but we're focused on making sure that we're dropping those number of hours worked, and I think we'll get there.
Yesterday you mentioned you're delivering a balanced budget this year with this proposal. Can you just clarify, with this budget for next year, is the deficit wiped clean completely?
No, again, we're going to have to, taking on a $73 million deficit is something I've been very clear about. It's not something you're going to wipe away in 1 year. It's going to take several budget cycles to do it. That's why we're not taking the proceeds of the sales of the ramp and plugging them in for 1 year or anything like that. That's why we've taken the other measures that we have, whether it's reduction in spending, cuts to departments, whatever it might be, and then we'll use that money over the course of the next couple of years with some other things some other revenues that we'll bring in the door to bring this in line.
If everything you're hoping for comes true, then what is the budget deficit for the following year?
Again, it's tough to tell you what things will be a year from now. You don't know how much you're receiving revenue. We rely on sales tax from the county. You don't know what that number might be. So there's so many factors throughout a year. It'd be very difficult to project what our deficit could be a year from now.
In terms of the timing of this budget, I know the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Committee went down to council chambers today to say, hey, look, this seemed very rushed, this process. Council members argue that they need all the time that they can get to work through this budget. How was this process in bringing this, to the council April 8th instead of the typical May 1st deadline?
Yeah, well, I'd love to have 3 more weeks, believe me. But the date is what the date is. The Commissioner Nosworthy, the different commissioners, the team got to work and stuck to what's obligated of us, provided the budget on time today, a balanced budget. I think a great spending plan for next year, and more importantly, a fantastic 4-year plan where we can rectify the structural imbalance of the city's finances.
As we learned during the Finance Committee meeting today, prescription costs are kind of running amok, so to speak, with Ozempic and Wegovy to the tune of about $2.3 million. How do you rein that in so it doesn't really negatively impact the budget as we're seeing?
Yeah, we're talking about that, obviously, internally. That's not the only thing that, it's not the only major increase to cost. Obviously, there's other healthcare costs associated with some of these increases. So, we'll work with our partners in that area to see how we can drive down some of those costs moving forward. But that's certainly not the only thing driving up our bottom line.
With a $70 million deficit, an 8% tax increase this year, do you expect that to go up in the years following?
What to go up?
The tax increase.
No, if you take a look at the 4-year plan, we have it structured where we spend down over the course of 4 years. It's a good song. It's we spend down so what we did, we booked $40 million for the proceeds of sale for the parking authority. Based on some conversations we've had with others, we think it could be well north of that, but wanted to be very conservative in booking that number. And we spend that $40 million down over the course of 4 years, associated with a drastic reduction in proposed tax increases over the next 4 years.
Does this budget reduce any services for residents of the city of Buffalo?
Nope.
I mean, they're going to want to know how this directly impacts them.
No, does not cut any services, reduce any services, does not include a single layoff. And I know one of the other things people like to talk about is the user fee. Absolutely no increase to the user fee as well.
More specifically, what is your message to the taxpayers who might hear 8% and feel that, the wall's already tight as is? And then, given last year, a 9% tax hike was proposed, ended up going to 4.19%. Do you foresee working with the council to keep that at 8%?
Yeah, we've had conversations with the council about that 8%. We think that's the number it needs to be. If you start dropping that down, we've got to start looking at cutting other things, right? And then you start getting into some of the stuff that really impacts residents. So whether it's direct services, things like that, if we have to start laying people off, there's obviously a reduction in service there. So we think that the 8%, what it ultimately winds up with the end user, we hope that it doesn't impact anyone too negatively. That's why we went through the process of doing all these cuts, and more importantly, trying to get these 2 pieces of state legislation through. I can tell you that in next year's budget, we're accounting for $30 million in these 2 pieces of legislation. If those aren't included, that's an additional 18% tax increase. So if you can either do that, you can start laying people off, or a combination of the two, and we wind up in a very tough spot. So to that end, I can't thank the Majority Leader, Crystal Peoples, enough for the work she's done on advocating for the city of Buffalo. I want to thank the governor's office for everything they've done, and again, hope that our partners in the state Senate come through for us as well.
Are you ruling out layoffs completely if you get into the second or third quarter of next year and realize it's an issue? Could that come back in rear step?
We'll look at everything. I don't want to speculate about layoffs and have anyone nervous. I feel very confident in the representation we have in Albany, in our governor's office, in the assembly, that these things are going to come through. And I believe that the work that we've done on this budget, and again, like I said, more importantly, the 4-year plan and how we're going to structurally right-size the city's finances leads us to a path where we'll be okay.
How do you plan for the unknowns? Specifically, we found out yesterday that the county's going to be walking away from its obligations at Key Bank Center. Borough and the city of Buffalo is going to have to then resume ownership because it's leased from the city. How do you account for that? And
Yeah, little busy the last 24 hours preparing a budget on your truncated timeline that Kristen mentioned. So we haven't had any conversations with the county or the Sabres about that yet. Again, it's not something, that would ultimately lead to, I'm not certain of. So it's, again, we'll take it as it comes, but again, we haven't had any conversations, and hopefully negotiations in the future will lead to a situation where it doesn't lead to any additional incurred costs for the city.
Is this just a blanket tax hike? There's no commercial property tax?
Correct. Well, it's an 8% on the tax levy straight across, yeah.
What's the tax rate then, if this 8% goes through, what would be, effectively be the tax rate?
So currently, the tax rate in the city of Buffalo is $11 and change. The tax rate for next year will be $6.52 per $1,000 of assessed value. The good thing for Buffalo residents to know is their property value is worth a lot more than it has been the past few years. So despite the fact that there is an 8% tax increase proposed on the levy, people's home values are skyrocketing. So the city of Buffalo is in a very good position when it comes to real estate and people's properties and the values that those properties hold. We just got to make sure that we bring enough revenue in the door to provide the services that are needed. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor.